Your most common request is how we use the Insta360 X4 360 degrees action camera underwater. So we will be covering 12 tips and tricks on today's episode on the DiveSAGA channel. Well, hello guys and welcome back to another episode on the DiveSAGA channel. Today it's time for another educational episode. We're going to talk about underwater photography and videography. It's been a while, but there have been a lot of requests in the comments about how to shoot underwater with the Insta360 X4. So with an actual 360 degrees camera. How do we shoot with that? How do we plan our shots? How do we edit? So that's what we're going to do today. This episode is sponsored by Insta360. Makes perfect sense, of course, but that also means that if you guys want to pick up your own X4, there will be a link in the description and in the comments down below as well. So definitely have a look at it. I have been integrating it into my episodes, and that's of course where a lot of the requests have been coming from. It's a really useful tool in my opinion, especially if like me, you're often out in the field alone. I don't necessarily always have someone to film me, so having the Insta360 X4 there is a great way to add some variety to the shots. So before we can really get started, we need to talk about what 360 shooting really is, because if we don't understand the concept of shooting 360 degrees all around us, then really it's not going to be a very useful tool. So in order to understand that, you need to be able to conceptualize where the camera is, where it's going to be. Traditionally, of course, with regular cameras, there is one lens. We point the lens at whatever we want to film, and that's about it. Now, of course, with a 360 camera, there's two lenses, and both of those lenses have a 180 degrees field of view with a little bit of overlap, and then the camera stitches that together seamlessly. So instead of the camera being pointed at something, you have to imagine the camera being in something, because everything around the camera is now going to be a possible shot, a potential shot. It is then up to us afterwards to choose which portion of that shot we choose to show. Now you do have to plan ahead a little bit, especially if you're going to be using movement. One of the things that in my opinion makes these cameras so powerful is the fact that when you now add movement, both physical movement, moving the camera, and then panning around inside the 360 degrees field of view, you can generate some really crazy movements, but you have to learn how to think that way. A camera is of course only as good as the camera operator. So planning those movements can be very tricky in a way, because you really have to imagine what it would look like from all those possible angles and maybe pre-plan which ones you're going to select. There's a shot in our last episode where we dived the MV Carvela in Malta, where I'm standing on the bow of a boat. It's not an underwater shot, but I think it's a really good shot to explain what I mean when I say plan the movement, because all I'm essentially doing is I'm holding the invisible selfie stick, I'm holding it close to the water, and I'm bringing it up. I'm just doing this movement. That's all there is. But because we're also panning inside the 360 field of view, we're going from the water to the side of the boat, and we're also zooming out a little bit. More about editing in a second. But the combination of both the physical motion and then the keyframe motion in the editing software is what really makes the shot. And to be really honest, when I shot it, I already expected it to look like that because I knew what I was going to use. Thirdly, you also have to really think about the distance from the camera to your subject. This is something that's also a little bit new. As I said, these are actually two sensors, two lenses that each have a 180 degrees field of view, and they're stitched together. But that also means, of course, that in the middle there is an area where both images overlap, and then the software stitches those together. But what happens is if you're a little too close to the side of the camera, if you will, that overlap area gets a little bit lost. That's not because it's not a great product. That's simply physically, there's no other possibility. The sensor and the lens have a certain size, and so there needs to be a dark spot, if you will, that simply has to be painted out. You learn how to work with that. That's fairly easy. What I do is I use the same rule that I use with all action cameras that have a wide angle lens setup. Is about 3-4 feet away from the camera is where the good stuff starts. Then when we start shooting, we also have to think about the preparation. You can't just throw this in your bag, pick it up and go diving. You do need to give a little bit of love and care to it. So even though the X4 itself is also submersible, you get way better results if you use the invisible dive case. So this invisible dive case is also surprisingly invisible all the way around. So the camera can even look this way and it still ignores the housing. For that to work well, you need to, of course, make sure you use the correct settings. So for one, be careful a bit that you actually select dual lens mode, because as I said earlier, you can use single lens mode, which is useful if you just want to use it as a regular action camera, but make sure that you do have it in dual lens mode. Typically, the camera will detect the fact that it is inside the invisible dive case, and you can also afterwards in the software, again it usually recognizes it, but you can also switch that on and off, because of course the software needs to work around the case and kind of make those the seams disappear. But it's, in my opinion, it's almost sorcery how it actually is able to ignore all of the case. But think about the settings before. You cannot access all the settings once it's in the housing. That's the case with most action cameras. But so also think about your resolution, for instance. Yeah, I don't necessarily always shoot at the highest possible resolution, especially underwater where there's often less light as well. Sometimes it's worth going a little bit down in resolution and helping the camera in just capturing well. There is also space for moisture absorbing pads, which I always put in there. The camera really does have to work, does get a little bit warm, but yeah, definitely when you set it up, when you first go diving, pay some attention to it. Also remove all the dust. So these are pretty large domes, and you are of course shooting through those, and what you want to avoid is that there is any kind of dust or water droplets on the inside of those two dome ports. Yeah, that's normal. I mean, people who have maybe a more professional setup and who use a dome port will also know that obviously that doesn't magically disappear. If there is interference on the port, the camera will pick that up. It's of course the same here. The added risk is, of course, that because you can pan around inside your shot, if there is now dust, for instance, on the lens, on the port, and you pan around, that dust will start moving as you pan around in the shot, and so it becomes even more noticeable. If your field of view is static, in other words, you're not panning around digitally, well then maybe the little speck of dust or the little water droplet will simply go unnoticed because it kind of blends into the image. But of course, if the image moves around, then that speck of dust or water will travel around. So give yourself all the options. Just pay a little bit of attention, blow out any dust, any water, and make sure that also check the O-ring maybe. But that's kind of standard operating procedure in my opinion for working with dive housings anyway. When we're then shooting, we need to think a little bit about where we are going to place or attach the camera. Yeah. So of course, this housing comes with your typical action camera attachment options, and you can go many ways. I don't recommend holding it though, yeah, because as I mentioned earlier, the camera sort of ignores, paints away this part of the housing as well. But if you're holding it, it's not going to be able to wish away your hands, right? So then that'll be a little bit strange. A great option is, of course, to use the invisible selfie stick. So the algorithm is such that the stick simply gets ignored by the software. So this basically everything here will simply disappear. I have some cool shots where you can see that obviously the camera here is attached to the DPV, but you don't see the stick. The stick is digitally removed automatically. By the way, there's nothing you need to do there. Something else you can do that I sometimes do is, if I'm shooting with my SLR, for instance, I'll put this on top of it, yeah, and that way I still have the option to either use it as a backup camera and just shoot the same direction that I'm shooting with the SLR, or I can pan around after the fact, right, and look at myself. Maybe I want to insert a little selfie shot. I sometimes do that in the episodes, breaks up the shots a little bit. So that's an option as well. So where you attach it, you can get really creative with it. Sometimes I also I hold the stick, but I kind of pretend like I'm not holding it, like maybe I'm also holding on to something else, which then justifies why my hand is the way it is. But it makes it the camera is sort of floating, and the viewer loses a bit of concept where the camera even, or how the camera is even attached. That's also what gives those drone-like qualities. Then you might also want to shoot with lights. If you shoot a lot underwater, yeah, especially video, you may use video lights. That's great, do that, but you do have to watch out. Yeah, if you point lights at the housing, well, you're dealing with two rather bulky dome ports here. Any light that hits one of those ports is going to, of course, bounce around, and it's going to reveal the dome port to the camera. So you're going to get a little bit of shine. Again, that's not a failure on the camera or on the housing. That's also with regular dome ports that happens, but you do have to be mindful of that, especially then if you do have some dust or some water droplets inside the housing. You're now backlighting those with a light. They're going to be very visible. So definitely use lights, but position those away from the housing, so that you have the best possible results. Even if you have other divers in the shot, I know sometimes it's nice when they shine their light at you, for instance, you get a little bit of flare, but definitely don't linger on that, because it will illuminate any imperfections that you are potentially picking up. Then, of course, we need to edit. Now, there is, of course, the specialized software for that. So Insta360 has their own Insta360 Studio. I use that. I think that's it's very easy and intuitive, and has a very rather simple setup, to be honest. And when we do that, of course, you need to consider then every angle. So here I have a shot essentially of myself on a DPV with some buddies. You may have seen this on Instagram, which you should follow, of course. And so to give you an idea, if you're unfamiliar with 360, so this is the angle that I have now arbitrarily chosen, but everything around the camera is an option, right? So in both horizontal and vertical sense, I can turn around and look wherever I want, but the camera is attached with a pole, with an invisible selfie stick actually on the DPV. But as I said, that gets sort of painted away by the software, by the camera even. So yeah, I can go anywhere rotating around this center point. What people sometimes misinterpret is they think, oh, can I go between those two DPVs? No, you cannot afterwards physically travel in 3D space, of course. Yeah, it's not magic. The camera was in a certain spot at the time of shooting, and of course from there it has captured a 360-degree image. What you can do is, of course, go a little closer or go a little bit further. Considerations, yeah, great resolution on the camera, but of course if I zoom in, as with any camera, you will eventually break the resolution if you just go close enough, right? So I usually try to stay pretty much at the linear distance that I shot at. If you go too far back, it can be cool, but of course the horizon starts to warp completely. Yeah, so that can be nice for dramatic effect, but that's a choice, a stylistics choice more than anything. Now, if you are into editing, but maybe not very much, then there's something to learn here, which is keyframes. Yeah, so if you're very well-versed editor, you know keyframes. Keyframes are points in the video that you use as set points, and after those set points, you can then change a parameter, put another keyframe, and then everything between those two keyframes will be morphed from one parameter to the next. What do I mean by that? Let's say that here I want to face the scooter divers, but about 3-4 seconds later, I want the camera to have turned around 180 degrees. Yeah, so you can do that, turn around, place a keyframe, and now when we go backwards and we play this clip again, you will see that the motion is now executed by the software. Yeah, so this can work. It really depends if you have planned that or not. Or sometimes you can play around afterwards and see if that's maybe a cool motion to add. So again, this is not a physical motion, which we mentioned earlier by moving the camera. This, although the camera is of course traveling, but this is purely after the fact. Yeah, you can of course remove your keyframes as well. You can also move them further apart. It is also kind of an artistic choice, right? Like here we travel between the seagrass. It's, in my opinion, kind of cool facing the DPV, but it's perfectly possible that you say, hey, you know what? I actually want to see what the shot would look like if we travel point of view through the seagrass, right? So then we just kind of find that part in the video. There we go. Set our keyframe and use the shot like that. So that's really up to you. I mean, now you can sort of direct your video after the fact, right? I really like to pre-plan my shots, but it can be fun to think that through afterwards and see what else you can get, consider every possible angle. And then lastly, you have to, of course, integrate that into your video somewhat seamlessly. Don't go overboard. It's a great tool. I love it, but not every shot has to be an Insta360 shot per se, right? What do I mean by that? Well, it can take you a little bit out of the experience if the shot is very distinctly different from all your other shots. So I usually like to shoot my regular video as well with a little bit of motion, controlled motion, so that when we then go into a 360 shot, it doesn't come completely out of the blue, but it integrates nicely. But again, you do that by pre-planning a little bit all your shots. So that's my take on how to get the best results out of the Insta360 X4. Again, guys, this episode was sponsored by Insta360, and thanks to that, I'm also able to put a link below in the description and in the comments where you can get your own Insta360 X4 and go play around with it. It's a learning curve. You have to experiment, but as you can see in our previous episodes, and as you will see in upcoming episodes, you can get some pretty cool shots that you wouldn't be able to get with any other camera on the market, in my opinion. While you're at it, maybe also pick up some merch. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate each and every one of you. Next episode, we are going to dive to a sunken submarine wreck, World War II. Super cool. I'm very excited about that. Make sure to subscribe to the DiveSAGA channel if you haven't already, and follow us on Instagram. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.